Okay, so God knows for those of you patiently watching live what you just witnessed. I'm quite certain I'll be able to fix that. Hey, don't fix that post. Just get rid of a lot of stuff. So we'll probably just start here. For those of you watching after the stream, now that we have audio and video working the way it should have been, I apologize. They were trying a bunch of stuff last year or yesterday, and it clearly screwed up OBS good. But long term, it should be helpful for getting some other stuff to work. I think there's been some lessons, and turns out I finally reached a certain level of computer games where my relatively older computer finally can't handle it. So I'll have to upgrade that before I play the game I was testing out yesterday. But anyways, thanks for joining us here at Comic Island after some delay. Ooh, like 5 minutes or so. We're going to be talking about Stillwater number 2 and 3. I apologize for all the technical issues, but for those of you watching after the fact, you won't experience a thing. Now, we reviewed this first book a while back. I quite enjoyed it as far as a single issue introducing a new series goes. It did a pretty good job. Basically introduced us to this character named Daniel, who's sort of writer, graphic artist of some kind. I believe that's his name. And he ends up being told that he has some sort of inheritance, and he has to go and learn more about it at this town called Stillwater. He goes with his buddy, and they go and visit this town, and pretty quickly they determine something very strange about it. They witness this little boy being like pushed off a roof, and they take him to a doctor's place after he's horribly injured, only for the boy to kind of get back up and seem fine. At which point, the town turns horribly hostile on them. And they almost have like a Stephen King aspect to them, like the very close knit community, each with their own little quirks and stuff. And we start to get to know the town a little better in issues 2 and 3. But the first book ends with Daniel's friend being horribly murdered outside of town. That's the only place anywhere in Stillwater where people can actually be killed in a way that they will die and stay dead. Everyone within the town, not so much. So, thanks for joining us, Karsten. That's what the first book is kind of about, and the second book is basically kind of picking up the pieces of that first one. The only reason Daniel is spared is this woman runs up basically to his little spot of execution and claims that Daniel is her son, and so they decide not to kill the man, but rather bring him to the town's judge, who is going to decide what to do with him. The judge kind of makes it pretty clear early on that he is basically determining whether or not Daniel gets to live through all of this. They've proven they are very willing to kill. Meanwhile, the crazy cop from the first, like he's the deputy of the town, we learn, and he's in the first issue and like violently attacks Daniel and his friend and ultimately murders Daniel's friend. He is extremely angry and violent towards Daniel's apparent mother. You start to get a glimpse of some of the stuff going on in this town because Daniel's mother isn't much older looking than him. We get an interesting flashback early on to like when Daniel was a kid, and clearly there's like something going on here. At one point, this woman just sees this boy like playing in front of a wolf, but that boy's name is Tommy. I think he's the strange boy that they find playing on the rooftop again, and we actually meet the sheriff of this town. She's actually a like red-haired woman. She just shoots the deputy right through the jaw, and it's just like, well, you'll be fine. Everyone's just fine in this town, but like that's the least you deserve for executing someone without consulting the judge. Now you're like accosting Daniel's mother, and she's a citizen of this town. Get your crap together, kind of thing. And she like helps Daniel's mother up, and they kind of talk a little bit. Um, The sheriff is kind of makes it clear that the judge is perfectly willing to kill Daniel, even though he's related to someone in the community. That doesn't necessarily make much of a difference, but Daniel's mother seems quite certain that he will spare her son. Says, like, if he doesn't, she'll kill him. So the judge is an interesting character. He They talk about it a bit in issue 3 as well, but he kind of has sort of absolute power in the town. It's something that happened gradually over time. The judge kind of explains a little bit about this community, and Daniel, all he can think of is Blade from Marvel, and he's like, "You're a town full of blades, like immortal vampires." And the judge is like, "Well, we're not vampires, but you are right in that we are immortal. As long as you are within the borders, you don't die, you don't age, and you will heal from anything." We'll learn a little bit more about this in issue 3, but it's pretty interesting stuff. So, um, they kind of talk about what to do with him, and eventually Daniel is brought to like this little public ceremony at this gazebo thing where the whole town is gathered. Explains that Daniel's mother, Laura Quinn, like who they love, betrayed us, and I guess she had this kid and let him out of the community so he could grow up, but they're not okay with that. So they bury her alive, which is an interesting, it's a very X-Men Krakoa kind of thing, where it's like, well, she won't die down there, but it is horrible suffering, and they leave her down there for 2 weeks. And as they're doing so, they're like, as for you, Daniel West and Tommy Quinn. Oh, okay. So that flashback is him at the beginning. That was his birth name. Um, they're like, well, this is your heritage. You had no choice to leave, but now you're home. Like you're a citizen of this community now and forever. Um, they even say something interesting because this town's been around for centuries, as have most of these people, which they'll talk about a bit in the next issue. And they say they're granting him citizenship, but they've only ever done 3 times in their history now, including him. And and then the final moment just shows like the earth enveloping Daniel's mother, because Ramon Perez and Mike Spicer are awesome artists. So in a really strong moment, it just ends on this final phrase: "Welcome to Stillwater." Chapter 3, as they call it, kind of picks up on that a little bit. This doctor who Daniel and his friend met in the first issue, like Daniel reapproaches because he's a little more upfront than some of the other people in Stillwater. Carson says, "Wait, is Daniel West Iris West's brother?" Well, he's not even. That's not even really his name, as we just mentioned. It's Tommy Quinn, I guess. But the doctor kind of walks him through some of the things in town. The doctor's interesting. He's very like, well, there's some things that if the judge, the sheriff haven't told you, I assume they have their reasons. But he goes into like everything heals in this town from the moment it was frozen or from the moment they entered the town. Picks a stalk of corn and it just immediately regrows in front of him. They walk up to a pasture and he talks about, well, like we don't actually need to eat, but we like to. We're very tricky. We have to be very careful about meat because even if you were to say cut off somebody's head, the whole body will just regrow. And the doctor even mentions stuff that's interesting. Zdarsky's bringing up, like that you can regrow things like that. But he also says he doesn't understand where the energy comes from to create this mass. Done all these experiments and he can't account for it. He's like, "It'll be magic as far as I'm concerned," just because he doesn't have any other explanation for it. And then so they're in front of these cows, and he's like, "So yeah, we have to be really careful around meat. Like even importing it could lead to like just this thing regrowing into a new animal. But what they will do for animals living within the town is just butcher it alive and take off slabs of meat, and it'll just regrow it." And he's doctor staring at this cow, just staring back at any other cow. But like, can you imagine just living forever and constantly butchered alive and then just regrowing the next day without any end or explanation? Um, So, and that they showed that wolf early on. Like the animals might have a very interesting part in all of this. And there's some very cool, disturbing aspects to Unity and stuff. That's about it for what we get so far. There's other little things. Daniel is very much he keeps trying to escape in issue number three. Well, not keep. He tried twice, and both times they just shoot him before he leaves the town and drag him back. But Sheriff's like, the only reason that I'm doing this is because you're a citizen now, and you just had two strikes. Like, if you do it again, I'll just wait until you like go 50 feet across our town's border and then shoot you because you won't come back. And Daniel like regrows from those wounds and experiences that healing himself, and fine, done. There's little things about the town that are kind of weird, just about living and stuff. Like, no one actually goes to the doctor's office; they just keep it around for appearances. And I was thinking about that. It's like, well, need gasoline and stuff. They even kind of mentioned gasoline, and he's like, well, fire kind of just keep burning. It doesn't just immediately heal itself. It's burning like wood. It's complicated than that, and they've learned stuff on those lines the hard way. If there's fuel there, the fire will keep going, and that's a disturbing thing because I feel like they found that out in weird and disturbing ways with like people or animals or something. God knows. Adrian says that town could feed the world unless something bad happens after it leaves the area. Daniel actually approaches someone in the town, I think the doctor, about that, and that gets into the town's weird secrecy and the fact that the sheriff and the judge basically control the whole community with an iron fist, which the town basically allows. They've realized it's kind of for the best. That level of attention, like, not be good for them. I think they it's an interesting issue about all this secret stuff, and you can kind of see how the community came to be like that. It's a very disturbing community that I think they have had to do weird things. I can see how they've just become so isolated over time, especially because these are all just the same people. This town, I don't think, really grows or has children, and that's why Daniel's such a big deal and such a weird novelty to the community. Um, yeah, Adrian's saying there's some issues with audio. I did have issues here before, but he's saying it's happening on other streams. I've noticed YouTube has been a little buggy today with some of its streaming on that side, so it might be a little bit. I don't know. I think everything's working on my end at this point. I'm seeing good ratings now on terms of on OBS and everything. Um, Adrian says living forever. Yep, I'd be great with that. I was thinking that too, reading these books. Uh, they talk about how like there's a certain lack of like a pressing need to find answers, a certain recklessness, like find new things. But I would be pretty great with it too. But I do think I can understand how the community became so secretive and isolated too, because like I was saying, yeah, they're all the same people. So they've just all lived for centuries without changing or anything like that. Because children don't age, I don't think there's much of a desire to have children in this community, and it might be outright forbidden. Uh, but they even have Daniel meets a woman who he says it's the only person in town who actually scares him, in spite of the judge and the sheriff and the deputy all being pretty violent, authoritarian people. He meets this one woman who's like the record keeper and administrator of the town, and they're all celebrating something called the Death Day because to maintain records to outsiders, like you have to deal with social security. People have to come into town to provide gasoline and stuff like that. All these little things that have to have happened. Um, so to make it all seem like it exists, there's a doctor's office, a whole network of making people live, age, and then eventually die, only to eventually assume a new identity over the years. That's probably why his name is Daniel West, even though he was born Tommy Quinn. There's stuff like that going on. And Laura Quinn, Daniel's mother, probably that is not her birth name. Or is it like going to be her identity forever? Eventually, will be way too old to plausibly be looks like. Um, because they obviously aren't going into government buildings all the time and they control their own law enforcement, they don't have to worry about certain things too much. But there's little interesting details like that that I think make this story a little bit more elevated from your average horror story or comic along these lines. But I think Zdarsky's kind of going for some unique things here. Like, I feel as though ideas like this have been explored. Like, even as far back as Stargate, there's been towns or like little villages of just immortal people living in a very different way from humanity, and an outsider has to come in. But Zdarsky adds a horror bent to that. Yeah, there's been really creepy compare this to Stephen King of the nature of the town. But King's never quite written something like this before. Anything, it just sort of lives up to the kind of story he would write, even though he didn't. And in that regard, I think it's a solid book that I would recommend. I'm very curious what will happen next. I will say this reeks of needing to like be a limited series. It got some very interesting characters and some cool ideas. I can't imagine it going on and on forever. I wouldn't want that, and I feel that like based on what I've read so far, this is the case. That this is the kind of story with a strong beginning, middle, and end. I don't know how long that limited run could be. It could be short as like a couple dozen issues, or as long as like 100 or so, whatever it takes to service the story in question. But I really wouldn't want it extended or dragged out beyond that, or some sort of long, endless march some direction I can't really even pace out. Like, I wouldn't want this book to go on and on, such as like The Walking Dead, because all of these Stillwater books, for some reason, have colorized little previews of The Walking Dead at the end. Well, not for weird little promotional bit that Image is doing in a bunch of their books, I guess. And it fits with this. It's just always weird to see jump to that after all these interesting Stillwater books. Adrian's pretty much just agreeing with me there in chat. And with YouTube being so glitchy right now, I think we'll call the stream there. But thanks for joining me, Adrian and Karsten. That was fun to talk about the Cindy book. We got plenty more comics to talk about as well as other stuff. So maybe I'll focus on non-live things while YouTube is apparently having one of its many days. I will say, and this isn't really just YouTube. I had this issue with a couple of other websites, like even as simple as Microsoft's Windows. Like, you need to add new features to stuff that like comes at the cost of there being bugs, and like basic functionality of your site is very frustrating sometimes. But that's YouTube's problem, and I'm gonna have a feeling that the ultimate end product of this stream is gonna come out fine. So for those of you watching after, my guess is you won't have much issue at all. So great. Until next time, guys, I'll see you next time. Have a good one.